Uh, 5 days is going to be Yom Kippur. So I want to offer some ideas about what Yom Kippur is and what we're supposed to do in Yom Kippur and what we're hoping for. I've been dealing in the yeshiva with tshuva for a few weeks now, and just as this is recorded, so all those shiurim are recorded, so I'm not going to go back through an exposition of the idea of tshuva. As a one-liner, tshuva has 3 components: regretting what you've done in the past, resolving to change the future, and confession. And if you do those 3, then you are guaranteed forgiveness. Forgiveness means that no punishment in the future will take place, though there may be consequences of what you've done that have to be lived out, and there may be rehabilitation that's required for what's called kapara, atonement, but no punishment. So that's our job. Our job is to do tshuva before the end of Yom Kippur, as the Rambam writes. Now, on Yom Kippur, we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu for 3 things. And we ask for them with respect to 3 categories. In the daily prayers, you have 2 out of the 3, as you'll remember. But the 3 that you have in Yom Kippur is we want slicha, which is forgiveness, mechila, which is release, as I will explain to you what that means, and kapara, which means cleansing. You have to define them and see what the differences are between them. And we identify 3 categories of transgression which need this type of healing. One is called chet. Chet is a double term. Either it stands for failing to hit the mark in all cases and in every possible way, so it's a general term. Or when it's specific, as contrasted with other terms for transgression, it means unintentional but negligent failure. So it means the person is not a vicious criminal, the person is not trying to break the law, but he should have known better. He had a responsibility to know better, and therefore he's guilty of a negligent transgression. Avon means something that's deliberate. Deliberate means he knew what he was doing, he knew what the law was, he knew it, and often he knows what the consequences are, and he did it anyway. And then there's pesha. Pesha is even worse. Pesha is where the person wanted to transgress the law. In the case of Avon, he's addicted to bacon cheeseburgers. McDonald's bacon cheeseburgers. He doesn't want to break the law. He'd have been much happier if there weren't any law prohibiting it. Then he could eat it with a clean conscience. But he wants the bacon cheeseburger. And he knows he's breaking the law, and he's going to do it anyway because of his desire for the bacon cheeseburger. A pesha is rebellion. He wants to rebel. So you have a famous line in Proverbs, Mayim gnuvim yumtaku. Stolen waters are sweet. And the scenario is, Reuven's walking down the street, it's a hot day, dusty, he's thirsty. He looks into a window of a house and he sees a pitcher of lemonade sitting on a table. Looks around, seems like the house is deserted. There's a pitcher of lemonade on the table. So he walks up to the door and he tries the door, it's unlocked. He opens the door, he looks around, he doesn't see anybody inside. He says, okay, I can get it. I can do it. And just as he's about to pour himself a glass, someone comes out of a side room and says, oh, you're thirsty? By all means, have some lemonade. At which point Reuben says, thank you very much. No thanks. I got an appointment. And he runs out of the house because he wanted stolen lemonade. That's what he wanted. Once it becomes permissible, it doesn't have any interest in him anymore. He wants to rebel against God's authority. That's a pesha. Yeah.
Why then should it be that in the Talmud and other rabbinic literature that the word posheya means negligent and chote means one who actually decided to sin?
Well, I don't think that chote means he's decided to sin. The chote has a general term for all types of failure. And why? It's a good question. First of all, Talmudic terminology on the one hand and biblical terminology on the other hand don't have to be the same. And the prayers don't have to be taken from the Talmudic terminology. There's nothing having to be an overlap there. But there is a case where the person has already failed once, where there's an easy method to prevent failure in the future, and he doesn't avail himself of that method. That's what's called a person who later is called a posheya for having failed ignorantly of that. It's not just that he had a responsibility to investigate. He failed once that he knew, and there's an easy way to solve it, and he didn't bother to take it. And that's already brutal enough to be called. It is in a sense a posheya. And I'll give you a comparative judgment. There's a category in the Talmud called mumen lahachas. There's mumen l'te'over and mumen lahachas. Mumen is a person who habitually violates some law, and one type is l'te'avon. He has a desire for the thing, and he's not willing to curb the desire so as to keep the law. He's breaking the law. But he does it because he desires the thing. He enjoys it. He has no interest in violating the law. Again, he would wish that there weren't such a law. That's called mumen te'avon. Mumen lahachas, literally, if you take out the dictionary and read like a 6-year-old, says that he does it for spite. He does the wrong thing for spite. But the definition of the Talmud is a little more subtle. An example is this. Let's suppose you have 2 pieces of meat which are identical in all physical respects and economic respects. They cost the same amount, the same weight, same density, cooked to the same degree. They're absolutely identical. The only difference between them is that one is permissible and one is forbidden. And he has to eat. He has to choose which one to eat. And he flips a coin. That's called a mumen lahachas. Because it means that it's being kosher means nothing to him. It's worth 0. Because here, by taking the kosher one, he loses nothing else of interest to him. And yet it doesn't bother him to take the treifah. That's already called lahachas. So you see that the Talmud uses these words in a slightly expanded way and goes to the root of the motivation. Someone who says to anyone, what you want, what you desire, what you like means nothing to me, that is not just indifference. That's a direct insult. It's like you're worthless. That's okay. So anyway, that would be roughly what the word posheya means over there. So we want all 3 of these reactions from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, forgiveness, release, and cleansing, for all different types of transgressions. That's what we want and what it's for. Now, okay, so we spoke about the 3 different categories of transgressions briefly. Let's take the 3 things that we're asking for and see if we can disentangle them. Forgiveness is pretty much what it sounds like. There are descriptions in our literature of God's so to speak, negative emotions to those who are transgressors, and they aren't literal, of course, but they aren't empty. They're not just waste. They're not just nonsense syllables. They describe the severity of the kind of transgression that's being committed, and the kind of withdrawal on God's part of certain types of beneficial guidance of his life. Forgiveness would mean to overcome that gap that's been created by the transgression, to restore that kind of connection where Kodesh Baruch Hu's providence shows itself in the supportive way that it used to in the past. We call that forgiveness. That's slicha in Hebrew. Mechila is a word that's taken from Jewish civil law. Let's suppose that A owes B money. It could be because he borrowed it and didn't pay it back, or because he damaged something of B's, or because he injured B. Various ways in which a person can incur a debt. A has a debt to B. For whatever reason or other, B decides to release A from the debt. That's mechila. Mechila means I release my claim on the debt. I give it up. I'm not asking for it. Now, neither one of these implies the other. They're independent concepts. Let's say that A firebombed B's car because he was in the grips of a vicious, I will exclude the adjective identifying the politics, ideology, which led him to do that. And later he changed his mind and he feels terrible and he apologizes. So B could respond in one of, I guess, three different ways. He could say, well, I hear your apology and I believe you're sincere, but pay for the damage. In fact, that should be one of the tests that you really are sincere, that you're prepared to pay for the damage. I don't have to take a loss because of the terrible thing you did, even if you feel differently about it now. To release the person from paying for the loss would be mechila. On the other hand, the person may say, listen, it was damage and it was done deliberately and you owe it to me, but I don't need the money. And for whatever reason, I don't want to chase you for the money, but I don't ever want to see you again. I've had it with you. If you could do that, I don't trust you, and just, forget it. Certainly there's no friendship left, and I don't even want a relationship with you. I don't want to see you anymore. So there, he's not forgiving him, even if he is giving up on getting the money. So now, what we have to understand, this I believe is a point of the Vilna Gaon, that with respect to, in the case of every transgression, you incur both of these negative consequences vis-a-vis the Creator, and therefore you want both of them to be overcome. And the idea of withdrawing because of the challenge to the relationship, especially if it's deliberate, but even if it's negligent. So, of course, you want the Kodesh Baruch Hu to forgive you in that respect. But also, in addition to that, there is a quasi-monetary indebtedness that's induced by the transgression. Now, there's a phrase which is popular in modern Hebrew. It's, the acronym is doch. If you break a driving violation, you'll get a doch, which is short for din v'cheshbon, which is the classical term. Now, the Gottleib explains what is din v'cheshbon. Din means roughly judgment, and cheshbon means calculation. And the person does something wrong, at least in some circumstances, there's going to be both a din and a cheshbon. The idea is this. Let's say a Jew violates a commandment, positive or negative, doesn't matter. So, first of all, that's breaking the law. That will get a judgment as according to the law that's broken and the motivation of the person, the internal psychology and so forth and so on. That's din. But in addition to that, there's a failure of omission. During the time and using the resources with which he broke the law, he should have been doing something else. He should have been doing something positive. There's no time off from serving God. So a calculation has to be made. What could he realistically have been doing that was positive, which he omitted due to his expending the time and the effort on the transgression? And he owes that as well. So, for example, let's suppose that Reuven is employed by the widget factory to check the quality of the widgets. And he's standing at the assembly line. Every 10th widget he's supposed to take off and bang with a hammer to see if it's strong. That's his job, from 9 to 5. So he's there at 11:30, 12 o'clock. He's getting tired, he's getting bored. Yeah, 10th widget, bang. Another 10th widget, bang. Think, wait a second. I haven't spoken to my cousin in Alaska in a long time. And I know this guy goes to lunch right now. And he doesn't lock his office. I could go in and call my cousin on his telephone and have a conversation. All right, a few hundred widgets will go by. Okay, listen, it's very rare to find a bad widget. I'm sure nobody's going to get hurt. He sneaks off, makes a telephone call to his cousin in Alaska. They talk for 25 minutes, and he comes back to the assembly line. The company, with its infrared, night-sensitive camera system, picks up the whole thing, and they have a double complaint against him. Number one, he used the company telephone to call his friend in Alaska, and, that cost money, and so forth and so on. But also, he omitted checking the widgets. That's also a loss. and he'll be docked for that as well. So because Baruch Hu looks at us in the same way. You broke a law, and in addition, the time and energy you used to break the law, you should have been using to fulfill some commandment that you had. So there's a double indebtedness. Now, Jew says to Kodesh Baruch Hu, okay, I realize that what I did was wrong, and I realize that I have incurred this double indebtedness, but I have no currency to pay you back in, because everything that I have is yours anyway. Nothing belongs to me. I didn't create anything. So I'm stuck. There's no way that I can make up the indebtedness that I owe. So I'm asking for mechila, which means to be released from that debt. Okay, that's slicha mechila. We together so far? Okay, now the difficult question becomes, after the Jew has presumably received both slicha mechila, what else is left? What else is left? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu kiviyachol forgives, and he agrees not to tax the person to pay back what he can't pay back, what more could he possibly want? What more could he be missing? Now, I heard an idea, or maybe I misheard it from a certain source, and I taught it, so it's probably somewhere in the wealth of the recorded sources on the internet, somewhere. But I want to mention it because I discovered some years ago that it's wrong. It's deeply wrong, and I want to try to supply something else which I think is related, but would be more accurate. What I thought then was, okay, he's forgiven me, and he's not demanding that I make up the indebtedness. But how do I feel about myself? Can I look myself in the mirror and say, I did that? Can I accept myself? Can I be content with myself if I did that? I can't forgive myself. I stand guilty before the court of my own conscience. That's another outcome of the transgression, which weighs me down with the weight of my crime. So the third thing that I would ask for is kapara, that Kodesh Baruch Hu should cleanse me of the effects of my crime, even including that effect. That's what I said. As I say, I thought I had heard it from some great person. Now, I think, so to speak, structurally it's right. Yes, after Slicha Mechila, there is going to still be guilt. The fact that God forgives and God releases doesn't mean that I won't judge myself to be guilty. And there could be, the self-condemnation can bring about with it a certain amount of depression and all the rest. And yes, it could be helpful to be cleansed of it, but I think that there's a double mistake here. First of all, defining what the negative element in me, in the way I've defined it, is wrong, from a Jewish point of view, is deeply wrong. And number two, it's not obvious why I should ask God for that any more than I could ask him for help in healing a broken arm. What's wrong about it is this. In a certain sense, the smallest number that you can tolerate in Yiddishkeit is 2. You can't use 1. Maybe only for Kodesh Baruch Hu, maybe, but not for anything else. And I'll give you an example of this. Here it's 2 and 3, but it's the same idea. The commandments are classified in a dozen different ways. One classification is commandments between man and God, and commandments between man and man. So commandments between man and God are like keeping Shabbos and eating matzah on Pesach and blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah, keeping kosher. Between man and man, the obvious ones. Don't steal, don't injure people, don't slander people, don't injure them with words and embarrass them. Give charity. Love your fellow Jews. Those are interpersonal. So now, some people are a little bit misled. Let's see now. Okay, so one category is between man and God. Got that? Okay. And now the other category is between man and man. Between man and man. One-on-one. Is God in that category also? It says between man and man. And the contrast is between man and God. So it sounds like between man and God are something like religious responsibilities. Between man and man are moral responsibilities. And God's involved in the religious side, but not on the moral side. That's dead wrong. Because the commandments, commandments come from a commander. We're dividing up the commandments. Thou shalt not steal. Who issued that command? God did. So the commandment between man and man are really a three-part relation, not two. It's not man to man. It's man to man governed by God. God, of course, plays the chief role on both sides. He's the author of the rules. So you can't factor God out of the equation. Nothing in the world can have its character, its identity expressed if it isn't traced back to its relationship to its creator. There's no such thing. The concept is a non-concept. Another illustration of this, you're an archaeologist. I'm not wishing this on you. It's hard to find a worse fate than that. But imagine that you're an archaeologist, and you're digging up a human habitation from 3,000 years ago, and it's clear that there were fires there, and there were certain types of habitation there, and there's things, and some clothes, some weapons, and you find a thing which is clearly manufactured. It doesn't grow naturally. It's just, well, let's imagine that it's 18 inches long and 4 inches wide and 2 inches deep with rounded edges. Half of it is wood and half of it is metal. And it has smooth rounded ends, and it has some kind of design on it and niches in various places. You look at it and you say, I don't know what this was for. Obviously people made it, but I don't know what it was for. So you're doing the article for the Anthropology Journal, you take pictures of it, you weigh it, and calculate its density, and say, here, look, here it is, here's what it looks like, here's what it weighs, here's what it's made of. We just don't know, now listen carefully, we just don't know what it is. We don't know what it is because we don't know what it's for. Is it a weapon used for fighting? Is it a talisman used for religious rituals? Is it a system for keeping track of records? The notches are debts, and the painted symbols are dates or something. We don't know what it is because we don't know what it's for. When something is created by an intelligence, its identity is given by what it is for. That's why you can talk about good ones or bad ones, because you know what they're for. If you didn't know what it was for, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it's a good one or a bad one. Okay, so now, in the mind of the general population, that's because it's an artifact. That's because some human being created it. So then you have nature and you have the artificial. And in nature, you don't have these inbred functions because that's just nature, blind nature. But when people make it, then you're going to say, I don't know what it is because I don't know what it's for. Okay, but from our point of view, everything is made by an intelligent agent. So that being the case, if you don't know what purpose the intelligent agent created it for, you don't know what it is. You can't subtract God from the branches of a tree, or the waves of the sea, or dust, or frogs. If you detach God from it, then you can get a physical description of it, but you don't know what its identity is. These are illustrations of the idea that you can't detach God from anything and claim that you've understood it. Let me just finish the point here, and then I'll take a question. Now, what did we say kapara was for? When I stand and look myself in the mirror, when I stand before the bar of my own conscience, I find myself guilty. That's I in total isolation. That can't be right. That description can't be essential. It can't cut to the identity of the problem. The problem has to be something in relationship with God, because when I cut God out of the picture, whatever I say can only be artificial. It can only be superficial. It cannot cut to the identity thing. So if I could say that one key Hebrew concept, kapara, is to cleanse me of something which is defined by my detached existence from God, that's got to be wrong. In a deep philosophical sense, it's got to be wrong. Yeah.
Even among the natural things, of course you can say that this is a bad leaf because it doesn't do what leaves are supposed to do for a tree, or this is a bad I have a bad foot because it doesn't do the thing that feet are supposed to do.
Well, this is a very, very hotly debated issue in philosophy. So the question is whether function is a natural quality or isn't a natural quality. Now, when you say it's supposed to do, that sounds like there's someone who's doing the supposing. If it isn't someone who's doing the supposing, then where does the supposition come from? After all, think about an acorn from the point of view of a squirrel. What's that supposed to do? It's supposed to feed me, not make oak trees. Absolutely not. It's supposed to feed me. Oh, so let's see. Is it the oak tree that is supposed to is its function, or to feed the squirrel is its function? Right? I mean, there's no end to that kind of shifting of perspective. The idea of putting the artificer in with a capital A, because that perspective counts because he made it. He made it for a purpose. That gives it a purpose. But without that, it becomes very, very difficult. The standard challenge is, what's the purpose of the heart? To pump blood throughout the body or to make thump-thump sounds? It does both, reliably. Just pick up your ears and hear the thump-thump. So, no, it's for that. Well, is it because you needed to do that? So then you're imposing right? And then, but when you talk to people who are sort of into ecology and you talk about the acorn becoming an oak tree or feeding the squirrel, they feel pulled in both directions. They want there to be oak trees and they want squirrels to thrive. So then at that point they realize something's going on. It's not obvious at all. So it's not obvious that you can do it that way. But for sure, even if you could do it that way, the function of the Creator is going to trump those functions. So, I'm giving a shir. I'll call you back. So now, so let's go back to kapara. So it's not that I'm guilty before the bar of my own conscience. I can't live with myself. That can't be the right thing that I'm asking God for kapara for. First of all, because defining it in individualistic terms is wrong. And second of all, it's not obvious why that has anything to do with tshuva or anything else. If I'm suffering, and I would be better off without suffering. No. I'm giving a shir. I'll call you back. It's not obvious why I should ask God for that repair any more than if I had a broken arm, I would ask Him for a repair. But it has nothing to do with the tshuva process, the result of the tshuva process. So I think the right answer is this, that even though He has forgiven me and He has released me with mechila, can I present myself to Him in my relationship with Him with the same confidence, with the same sense of shared closeness that I did before? I'll give you an example. Imagine somebody's got a car and the brakes are loose and he knows he should go to the shop and have them tightened. He doesn't get to it and he's in a residential area and the brakes slip and he kills a child. Negligent manslaughter, I suppose it's called. It has a double effect. And when he broke the law, he could go to jail, I guess. I mean, I don't know the exact laws, but he can go to jail, but he suffers some penalty. And the child died. And, there's obviously a monetary claim on him. Now let's suppose that after a period of time, with appropriate remorse, the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, say, okay, according to the law, you owe us a claim of $2 million, but you're a bus driver and you're never going to have $2 million. We're not going to chase you for it. And after a while, they say to him, listen, maybe you're under pressure, whatever it is, we don't hate you. We don't hate you. We're not looking for revenge. We're not harboring hatred in our hearts. We're willing to turn the corner. Okay. So that makes the guy very happy, obviously. Now, it's the 4th of July citywide barbecue. Can we imagine the driver walking up to Mr. and Mrs. Jones and say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I haven't seen you in a few months. Let's sit down and talk. How are you? How's everything? Let's see what's happening. I don't think so. He killed their child. So let alone, how he faces his own mirror. But expressing himself in the context of a relationship with them is something which he could find very, very difficult. He won't have the confidence, even if he knows they've forgiven him, and they're not chasing him for the money. He can't feel at ease in expressing himself in that relationship. This is the third thing. Say to Kadosh Baruch Hu, okay, you've forgiven me. You're not holding it against me. You're not holding a grudge. You're not holding yourself back from me, and you're not going to cause me to lose what I wasted and make pseudo restitution. But I failed you, and I can't bring myself to relate to you with the self-confidence that I used to have. Please let me feel your love. Let me feel your support so that I can do that. I want to make that concrete. This is a motivation which has occurred to me a number of years ago, which I think is a helpful motivation. We come to, let's say, beginning of Elul. Picture Simchas Torah. On Simchas Torah, I'm going to pick up a Torah scroll and dance with the Torah scroll. How will I feel when I do that? Will I feel like a cheat? Like a hypocrite? I did that. I'm dancing in public with the Torah scroll? Okay, it's expected. And I have a white beard, so I have to show everybody else. But inside, how do I feel? Do I really feel that I'm dancing in joy before the Creator? Could be not. Could be that the weight of the failure is so heavy that I can't bring myself to that level. That's one way to explain kapara. Kapara is more than just knowing He forgives and that He's not going to tax me for the damage, but that He wants me to be connected to Him. Now the Rambam in the 7th chapter of the Laws of Repentance has a beautiful poetical expression of this. So before a person does tshuva, he's hated, he's rejected, many of his mitzvos are not accepted, he prays and God doesn't answer him. And then when he does tshuva, God loves him, treasures him, has pleasure in him, wants to hear from him, treasures his mitzvos, answers his prayers. And in the Rambam's description, it's overnight. And that's the way he's supposed to feel. The Rambam is writing that to let you know that you should feel close and happy and connected and treasured and appreciated when you do tshuva. That's where kapara could step in and say, that's the third thing. I want to be cleansed of the damage to the relationship from the side of my inability to relate to you with that wholeness and that completeness that we had before. You're not in my shir at 6:30, so I can tell you this because the last chapter of the Laws of Repentance is describing a person serving God with love. Out of love of the master of the world who commanded this, that's why a person is supposed to the highest level of service of God. What is that doing in the laws of tshuva? Why is it there? And the answer is because tshuva means going back to someplace. And the question is, where was I? What am I going back to? Well, I'm going back to a relationship with God. And the goal is to get back to that ideal relationship. Whether it was there before, what measure was there before, or maybe before you came into the world, I'm not going to that at the present moment. But this is the idea of when you do tshuva, that's what you're aiming for. And again, in the 7th chapter, he talks about mudbak, dveikus. Rambam didn't wait for the 20th century Jewish band, the Dveikus band, for this to become popular. The Rambam writes it in the Hilchos Shuvah, that the idea of being mudbak, attached to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, that's the goal of the project. So in the 10th chapter, he describes what being connected means. So this is what kapara, I think, could be understood. I'm not saying it means that because it means a lot of things. But kapara literally means cleansing. It means cleansing of this, one part is cleansing of this consequence of the transgression, which prevents that kind of relationship with God. Now this leads to a description of what's going on in Yom Kippur. those who are here or heard what I said about Rosh Hashanah, about how complex the day is, emotionally, experientially. The same thing is even more so of Yom Kippur. Because on the one hand, when you don't eat and you don't drink and you don't service the body at all, when the soul is on the front burner and the body's on the back burner, you become angel-like. And indeed, that's the analogy that is made. Men wear talis at night. Talis is enveloped in white. So it gives an angel-like appearance. The word Hasatan in Hebrew, which means the evil inclination and the accuser, has a numerical value of 364. So they say on Yom Kippur is not active. Because the day and the performance of the day and the expression of the day is such a powerful, elevating force that there's very little business you can get on Yom Kippur. So on the one hand, we're in a very, very elevated position. On the second hand, that's the day of cementing the tshuva that we're doing. And part of the cement of the tshuva that we're doing is regretting what we've done in the past. Yes, focusing on the failures and feeling terrible about them. So on the one hand, I have my talis on, dressed in white, standing like an angel before God. On the other hand, I'm looking at myself as a flesh and blood human being who's failed. And that has to be done as part of the project. And then framing projects. How am I going to avoid this? How am I going to set myself a new direction in life? That's hard. Both are hard. Facing yourself honestly is very hard. Most people would rather do anything, split rocks, rather than have to face yourself honestly and objectively. And then it's difficult intellectually and emotionally. Is this strategy realistic for me? I could say I want to do that, but if it's unrealistic, it's going to fail. So I've got to be realistic about what I can and cannot do. But Esther has a whole essay on this. So that's certainly very difficult. And then, as the day goes by, and as you perform more and more of the mitzvahs of the day, and you confess over and over again, and you feel the resolution solidifying, and you feel the new perspective solidifying, there's a sense of impending forgiveness. And the day takes on a level of joy. And there is a mitzvah of joy on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I said this when we were talking about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It is so. In fact, some of the Rishonim say that there was a nusach, Moadim l'simcha, chagim l'zmanim l'sason. You say in the prayers that the time of simcha and sason, of joy. There's no question that there's a mitzvah because Yom Kippur, like Rosh Hashanah, cancels avelos. What cancels mourning is the fact that there's a mitzvah of simcha. So there are other things going on as well, and the human heart is big enough to hold contrary emotions simultaneously, and it's not a demerit like when in your mind you have contradictory propositions, then you have a problem, because they can't be both true. And if you believe both of them, then you believe something that's false, and that's not good. But when you have contradictory emotions, that can be perfectly correct, perfectly realistic. So you have this tug of simcha and of joy, of knowing that the rehabilitation is taking place from your side and from the Kodesh Baruch Hu's side. On the other hand, the rehabilitation is because you're facing the failures and degradation and making plans. And the third thing that's going on is a sense of closeness to the Kodesh Baruch Hu. When we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, so I said before Rosh Hashanah, it's like a king who's coming to a town, sends his trumpeters ahead to blow a flourish on the trumpets to announce his arrival. So the people in the town should be aware of his arrival. The last thing that you do on Yom Kippur, which is because of Yom Kippur, is to blow the shofar. And if you're fortunate enough to be using a superior siddur, which would mean an Eidot Mizrach siddur, or a certain type of Hasidic siddur, next to the instruction to blow the shofar are two words in Hebrew, Siluk Shechina, and that means the withdrawal of God's presence. So just as the shofar at the beginning announced the Kodesh Baruch Hu's appearance among us, so the shofar at the end announces his departure. And this is based on an explicit verse in the book of Isaiah, an explicit statement in the Talmud, because the verse of the book of Isaiah says, Dirshu Hashem yimatzel karov isu karov, seek out Hashem when he's found, call to him when he's close. And the Talmud says, these are the days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. So this is a time when he's found and close. And he isn't like that the rest of the year. And as exciting and thrilling and inspiring as dancing with the Sefer Torah and Simchat Torah is, or the Seder is on the night of the Seder, or staying up all night and, on Shavuos and davening at the Koisel at dawn, they're all exciting and they're all thrilling and they're all inspiring, but none of them embody the closeness that we have right now in these 10 days. And that's lost in Yom Kippur. I find the blowing of the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur emotionally excruciating because of the struggle, because of the joy, and because of the pain of losing the closeness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. The three of them are going on simultaneously. I find that almost impossible to bear. So Yom Kippur has a great deal of complexity about it. Great deal of complexity about it. Last thing I want to say about Yom Kippur, which I don't know how many people are misled about this, but there are what are called the 5 inuyim, which are sometimes translated as the 5 afflictions. No eating, no drinking, no leather shoes, no washing, no sexual intercourse. These things, the word inui from Ayin Nun Hey as a root, don't mean afflictions, they mean deprivations. They are all things you don't do. There's no mitzvah to sleep on the ground on Yom Kippur. There's no mitzvah to turn off the air conditioning. There's no mitzvah to make yourself uncomfortable, stick yourself with needles to cause pain. It's not self-flagellation, contrary to the mistaken views of the anthropologists. It's deprivations. And the deprivations are not in the spirit there either of causing pain. The deprivations are there in the spirit of having created an alternative psychological focus so that these things are off the psychological page. As a Jewish motto puts it, on Tisha B'Av, when we mourn the destruction of the temple, who can eat? And Yom Kippur, who needs to eat? Who needs it? So you think, what do you mean? 25 hours without eating and drinking? Come on, be realistic. So let me give you a microcosm of this idea. Let's suppose you're listening to the judge read the verdict in your trial. He's got 25 pages in the verdict. I had a friend that went through this. And he's going to read a whole summary of how he sees the evidence and how he sees the arguments, and so on. In the end, he's going to pronounce the verdict. Okay, it's going to take him a half hour to read it. After 15 minutes, are you going to go out and get a Coke? Probably not. Probably not. It's a verdict on your trial. It's your future. You're probably interested enough to hear every word so that you won't be thirsty. You won't think of being thirsty. When's the last time I had a hamburger? Isn't this going to end soon? Probably not. By creating an alternate psychological focus, these things become off the psychological page. That's not self-flagellation, my friend the anthropologist. It's rather this alternative focus. I imagine there are exceptions, but the vast majority of people who practice Yom Kippur and believe in it and understand it, when they go into the Ela, which is the last hour and a half of the day, don't look at the watch and say, 45 minutes to the Coke. That's not what's going on. Open the gates at the time when the gates are being closed and locked. Open the gates. Don't think about food when you're saying that. So, one shouldn't interpret this as a kind of self-flagellation in anthropology, especially ancient anthropology is where people believe the gods, they've crossed the gods, and the gods are going to punish them, and they want to appease the gods by torturing themselves and say to the gods, see, we're already suffering, so you don't have to cause us to suffer. Then they see fasting on Yom Kippur and say, oh yeah, that's the Jewish ancient ritual of self-flagellation. Like the ancient Greeks, like the ancient Zulus, like the ancient Australian Aborigines, the Jews are the same. Well, no, we aren't. At least if you're right about them, then you're wrong about us. You could be wrong about them also. I don't trust your judgment across the board, but certainly that's not what's going on in our case. It's that sense of freedom from the body. The body exists, but you're free from the body. Okay, having said all of that, I have a few minutes, I'll share with you one final insight, which I usually say around Purim time. The Tikkunei Zohar makes the following remark. In the Torah, the day that's coming up on Monday is never called Yom Kippur, never, ever. It's Yom Kippurim in the plural. Why would it be in the plural? Now, I looked in the commentaries on the verse. I did not see anything. There is a Zohar, which I'm putting on the side for the moment. You know, Bina and Malchus together, that's why it's plural. Okay, fine, I said it, put it on the side. The Tikkunei Zohar says something striking. Of course, in the text of the Torah, there are no vowels. So the word Kippurim, atonements, could be read at just one dot. Purim. One dot under the kaf. Instead of one dot, make it two dots vertically. Then it becomes a day like Purim. And you think, oh, really? How about that? Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. Gotcha. I got it. I understand. Sure. You know, this must be Purim Torah. Like, what could that possibly mean? And the short answer is this. The goal of a Jew's service, 363 days a year, is that there should be created an integrated functioning between the soul and the body serving the purposes for which the soul puts it, so that there's an integrated functioning in serving God. That's what's going on 363 days a year. But there are 2 days a year that aren't two-dimensional, they're one-dimensional. And they're one each. Yom Kippur is the soul day, and Purim is the body day. Yom Kippur is the soul day because we said the body's on the back burner. The soul is expressing itself. The body not only doesn't get attention, but its attention doesn't pierce your consciousness. The body's just not there for your focus. So it's the day of the soul's expression. Purim, whatever else, this requires a long introduction, but just to make the parallel clear, on Purim there is a mitzvah for some people under some conditions, according to certain groups of the Jewish people, not all, of getting drunk. Getting drunk blocks out the control of the soul. The soul can no longer control what the body does. As you know very well, people are drunk, they do things that they wouldn't otherwise ever do, because otherwise their soul is in control. So Purim is the body day. In that respect, they are similar, because they're each one-dimensional. Now, in logic, if you say A is like B, that's not the same as saying B is like A, and neither is the same as saying A and B are similar. A is like B means B has some characteristic and A approximates it. It's only like it, not identical to it. So if you say that Yom Kippur is like Purim, Purim has to have some characteristic, and Yom Kippur should approximate that characteristic. What could that possibly be? And the answer is there are two types of one-dimensionality. On Yom Kippur, the one-dimensionality is there really is a body and a soul, and the body has its character, the soul has its character. It's just that the soul is getting expression, and the body is getting next to no expression. But the body, remains different. That's why it's got to be on the back burner, because otherwise it'll get in the way. The point on Purim is a person who gets drunk and who, without the conscious control of his intellect, expresses love of God and love of Torah, love of other Jews, which sometimes great people do when they get drunk, shows that the body has been elevated. The body has been purified. The body has already been integrated into his service of God. And that's more profound because on Purim, you have a deep expression of the fact that there is really only one dimension. aren't two dimensions. There's only one creator. He created all of it. The body also was an expression of the highest holiness, the highest value. But that you don't have in Yom Kippur. Because in Yom Kippur, you've got to deny the body expression in order for the soul to express itself. It means the body still has its antithetical qualities. You just have a way of putting them on the side. So in this respect, Yom Kippur and Purim are both one-dimensional days, but Purim is quintessentially one-dimensional. Yom Kippur approximates it. And there are sources which say that Yom Kippur, Purim makes up for Yom Kippur. It's a whole long thing. At any rate, these are some of the themes. There are more, but these are some of the ideas of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a very complex day, not only intellectually, but emotionally. It's a very complex day. And as my Rabbi Zatzal taught us, emotions are very important. There are mitzvahs for emotions. There are emotions which are appropriate to feel, emotions that aren't appropriate to feel. They vary from time to time, place to place, and person to person. And knowing about the emotions of Yiddishkeit is part of understanding what Yiddishkeit is. Okay.